Story number 6. Pippi arranges a picnic. Once upon a time. "We don't have any school today because we are having a scrubbing vacation," said Tommy to Pippi. "Scrubbing vacation? Well, I like that," said Pippi. "Another injustice. Do I get any scrubbing vacation? Indeed I don't. Though, goodness knows I need one. Just look at the kitchen floor. But for that matter," she said, "now I come to think of it, I can scrub without any vacation, and that is what I intend to do right now. Scrubbing vacation or no scrubbing vacation. I'd like to see anybody stop me. You two sit on the kitchen table out of the way." Tommy and Annika obediently climbed up onto the kitchen table, and Mr. Nielsen hopped up after them and went to sleep on Annika's lap. Pippi heated a big kettle of water, and without more than ado, poured it out onto the kitchen floor. She took off her big shoes and laid them neatly on the bread plate. She tied 2 scrubbing brushes onto her bare feet and skated over the floor, ploughing through the water so that it splashed all around her. "I certainly should have been a skating princess," she said, and kicked her left foot up so high that the scrubbing brush broke a piece out of the overhead light. "Grace and charm I have at least," she continued, and skipped nimbly over the chair standing in her way. "Well, now I guess it's clean," she said at last, and took off the brushes. "Aren't you going to dry the floor?" asked Annika. "Oh no, it can dry in the sun," answered Pippi. "I don't think it will catch a cold, so long as it keeps moving." Tommy and Annika climbed down from the table and stepped across the floor very carefully so they wouldn't get wet. Out of doors, the sun shone in a blue sky. It was one of those radiant September days that make you feel like walking in the woods. Pippi had an idea. "Let's take Mr. Nielsen and go for a little picnic." "Oh, yes, let's," cried Tommy and Annika. "Run home and ask your mother then," said Pippi, "and I'll be getting the picnic ready." Tommy and Annika thought it was a good suggestion, and they rushed home and were back again almost immediately. But Pippi was already waiting by the gate with Mr. Nielsen on her shoulder, a walking stick in one hand and a big basket in the other. The children walked along the road a little way and then turned into a pasture. This is where a pleasant path wound in and out among the thickets of birch and hazel. Presently they came to a gate on the other side. There was an even more beautiful pasture, but right in front of the gate stood a cow who looked as if nothing would persuade her to move. Annika yelled at her, and Tommy bravely went up and tried to push her away. But she just stood there, staring at the children with her big cow eyes. To put an end to the matter, Pippi set down her basket and lifted the cow out of the way. The cow, looking very silly, lumbered off into the hazel bushes. "How can cows be so bull-headed?" said Pippi, and jumped over the gate. "What a lovely, lovely wood!" cried Annika in delight as she climbed up on all the stones that she could see. Tommy had brought along a dagger that Pippi had given him, and with it he cut walking sticks for Annika and for himself. He cut his thumb a little bit too, but that didn't matter. "Maybe we ought to pick some mushrooms," said Pippi, and she broke off a pretty rose one. "I wonder if it's possible to eat it," she continued. "At any rate, it isn't possible to drink it. That much I know. So there you go. There's no choice except to eat it. Maybe it's possible." She took a big bite and swallowed it. "It was possible," she announced. "Yes, sirree. We'll certainly stew the rest of this sometime," she said, and threw it high over the treetops. "What have you got in your basket?" asked Annika. "Is it something good?" I wouldn't tell you for $1,000, said Pippi. First, we must find a good picnic spot. The children eagerly began to look for such a place. Annika found a large flat stone that she thought was satisfactory, but it was covered in red ants. I don't want to sit with them, said Pippi, because I am not acquainted with them. And besides, they bite, said Tommy. Do they? Said Pippi. Bite them back. Then Tommy found a little clearing among the hazel bushes, and he thought that would be a good place. Oh no, that's not sunny enough for my freckles, said Pippi. And I do think freckles are so attractive. Farther on they came up to a hill that was easy to climb. On one side of the hill was a nice, sunny rock, just like the little balcony, and there they sat down. Now shut your eyes while I set the table, said Pippi. Tommy and Annika squeezed their eyes as tightly shut as possible. They heard Pippi opening up the basket and rattling the paper. 1, 2, 19, now you may look, said Pippi at last. They looked, and they squealed with delight when they saw all the good things that Pippi had spread on the bare rock. There were good sandwiches with meatballs and ham, a whole pile of sugared pancakes, several little brown sausages, and 3 pineapple puddings. For you see, Pippi had learned cooking from the cook on her father's ship. Aren't scrubbing vacations grand, said Tommy, with his mouth full of pancakes. We ought to have them every day. No, indeed, I am not that anxious to scrub, said Pippi. It's fun, to be sure, but not every day. That would be too tiresome. At last the children were so full they could hardly move, and they sat still in the sunshine and just enjoyed it. I wonder if it's hard to fly, said Pippi. And she looked dreamily over the edge of the rock, and the rock sloped down very steeply below them, and it was a long way to the ground. I think I should be able to learn to fly, she continued. I think it must be harder to fly up, so I shall start with the easiest way. I'll fly down. I do think I'll try now. No, Pippi, cried Tommy and Annika. Oh dear, don't do that. But Pippi was already standing right on the edge. Fly, you foolish fly. Fly, and the foolish fly flew, she said, and just as she said flew, she lifted her arms and took off up into the air. In half a second there was a thud. It was Pippi hitting the ground. Tommy and Annika lay on their bellies and looked down at her terrified. I forgot to flap, she said joyfully, and I guess I had too many pancakes in my stomach. At that moment the children noticed that Mr. Nielsen had disappeared. He had evidently gone off on a little expedition of his own. They remembered that they had last seen him contentedly chewing the picnic basket to pieces, but during Pippi's flying experiment they had forgotten him, and now he was gone. Pippi was so angry that she threw her shoe into the big deep pool of water. You should never take monkeys with you anywhere, she said. He should have been left at home to pick fleas off the horse. That would have served him right, she continued. She waded into the pool to get her shoe, and the water reached up to her waist. I might as well take advantage of this and wash my hair, she said. And Pippi ducked her head under the water and kept it there so long that the water began to bubble. There now, I've saved a visit to the hairdresser's, she said contentedly when at last she came up for air. She stepped out of the pool and put on her shoes. Then they went off to hunt for Mr. Nielsen. Hear how it squishes when I walk, laughed Pippi. It says clafs, clafs in my dress and squish, squish in my shoes. Isn't that jolly? I think you ought to try it too, she said to Annika. Annika was walking along beside her, with a lovely flaxen hair, pink dress, and little white shoes. Some other time, said Annika sensibly. They walked on. Mr. Nielsen certainly can be exasperating, said Pippi. He's always doing things like this. Once, in Arabia, he ran away from me and took a position as a maidservant to an elderly widow. Tommy suggested they all three go in different directions and hunt. At first, Annika didn't want to, but Tommy said, You aren't afraid, are you? You're not a scaredy cat, are you? And of course, Annika couldn't tolerate such an insult, so they all went off. Tommy went through the field but didn't find Mr. Nielsen, but he did find something else. A bull. Or to be more exact, the bull found Tommy. And the bull did not like Tommy, for he was a very cross bull who was not at all fond of children. With his head down, he charged towards Tommy, bellowing fearfully. Tommy let out a terrified shriek that could be heard all through the woods. Pippi and Annika heard it and came running to see what the matter was. By that time the bull had almost reached Tommy, who had fallen over his heels. What a stupid bull, said Pippi to Annika, who was crying uncontrollably. He ought to know he can't act like that. He'll get Tommy's white sailor suit all dirty. I'll have to go and talk some sense into that stupid animal. And off she started. She ran up and pulled the bull's tail. Forgive me for breaking up the party, she said. Since she had given his tail a good hard pull, the bull had turned around and saw a new child to catch in his horns. As I was saying, went on Pippi, forgive me for breaking up the party, and also forgive me for breaking off. And with that, she broke off one of the bull's horns. It isn't the style to have 2 horns this year, she said. All the bulls have just 1 horn, if any. And she broke off the other horn too. As bulls have no feelings in their horns, this one didn't know what she had done. He charged at Pippi, and if she had been any other child, there would have been nothing left but a greasy spot. Hey, hey, stop tickling me, shrieked Pippi. You can imagine how ticklish I am. Hey, stop, or I'll die laughing. But the bull didn't stop, and at last Pippi jumped up on its back to get a little rest. To be sure, she didn't get much, because the bull didn't in the least approve of having Pippi on his back. He dodged about madly to get her off, but she clamped her knees and hung on. The bull dashed up and down the field, bellowing so hard that smoke came out of its nostrils. Pippi laughed and shrieked and waved at Tommy and Annika, who stood a little distance away, trembling like aspen leaves. The bull whirled around and around, trying to throw Pippi. See me dancing with this little friend, cried Pippi. At last the bull was so tired, he lay down on the ground and wished that he'd never seen such a child. He had never thought children amounted to much anyway. Are you going to take a little nap now? Asked Pippi politely. Then I won't disturb you. Go on, have a sleep. She got off the bull's back and went over to Tommy and Annika. Tommy had cried a little, and he had a cut on his arm, but Annika had bandaged it with her handkerchief, so that was no longer hurting. Oh, Pippi, cried Annika. Shh, 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 whispered Pippi. Don't wake the bull, he's sleeping. If we wake him, he'll be fussy. But the next minute, without paying any attention to the bull and his nap, she was shrieking at the top of her voice, Mr. Nielsen! Mr. Nielsen, where are you? We've got to go home. And believe it or not, there sat Mr. Nielsen, up in a pine tree, sucking on his tail, and looking very lonely. It wasn't much fun for the little monkey to be left all alone in the woods. He skipped down from the pine and up onto Pippi's shoulder, waving his little straw hat, as he always did when he was very happy. Well, well, so you aren't going to be a maidservant this time, are you? Said Pippi, and she stroked his back. You wait and see, it's going to turn out okay. And then they strolled home, Pippi's dress still going claff, claff, and the shoes still going squish, squish. Tommy and Annika thought they had had a wonderful day in spite of the ball, and they sang a song that they had learned at school. Pippi sang too, but with delightfully different words. In the jolly summertime, through fields and wood I make my way. I do exactly as I wish, and when I walk it goes squish, 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 and my old shoe, it's really true, sometimes chip and sometimes chew. For the shoe is wet, the bull sleeps yet, and I eat all the rice pudding I can get. In the jolly summertime, I squish whenever I go. Squash, squish, the end.